Hello everybody. So today I'm going to talk about the human head and the face and how to draw all the features. And this is by far one of the most complicated things to draw, and it's because we see faces all the time. Our entire lives we spend looking at people in the face. So we know what a face looks like, so if a face is drawn wrong, it's something, that we quickly can pick out as not feeling right. So there's a lot of details that you really need to pay attention to when drawing a face correctly, which is why I always recommend using references, getting models, photographing them, and using that to draw your face, because there's just a complex level of detail that is just so hard to match. But on top of that, it is super helpful if you understand the anatomy of the face and all the pieces that make up it, because it will help you when you're using your references. And it'll give you that starting point for making your own faces here. Once you know that structure, you know how you can, bend it and move it around and change it to make your own unique faces. But you have to have those basics. So I'm going to walk with you through today on how to draw a human head, going from the skull out. So we're going to learn how to draw the skull, then we're going to learn how to do the planes, and then how to draw all the details, and talking about all the different proportions along the way that will help you when drawing your own heads. Okay, so the first thing, we're going to start with a circle. We're actually going to be drawing 3 heads here. I want to give you 3 different views. I'm going to make this a little bit transparent. So we're going to be drawing 3 heads. The first one is going to be orthographic front view, second one's an orthographic side view, and then the third one's going to be kind of our perspective view. It's basically a 3/4 view. So we're going to be looking at the head at these 3 different angles and show you how to build out the features. And the first thing I'm starting with is the skull, because you got to know the inner structure before you can build outside on top of that. You have to know how these features actually work from the inside. That's how the human body works, inside out. So we might as well work that way too. So first thing you start with when drawing your human head is a circle. Like many things, this is one of the basic forms that we're going to start with. And from there you're going to divide it down into quadrants. So we got the front dividing into quadrants there, the side going to divide into quadrants, and the 3/4 view. Now this is a 3/4 view, so we're not going to just divide in the center. We want to think about that wireframe, think about it in perspective. So let's kind of do a 3/4 cross section, helping us get this layout here a little bit. Okay, from there we want to pop on a square to sort of the bottom of your skull here. So if you imagine this is like the round portion of your skull, underneath it, we're going to put this square or rectangle-like form that's going to kind of be, our jaw. So if we get that in there on this side here, we're going to draw the same thing. Now because it's the orthographic front and side, I'm going to try to line up, my 2 views as I'm doing this. So you can see that's kind of the jaw sitting on the front there. And then as we go into the 3/4 views, we kind of picture this, in that 3-dimensional view. So I'm going to try to get this divided here. And I'm going to imagine a, rectangle kind of sitting on the bottom front of our skull there. And this is going to help as our basic structure, get us going as we move forward here. Okay, so now where do we start? I think the easiest place is usually to start with the eyes. And the eye sockets, because this is our skull, are going to be right underneath this dividing line we make. So right under that halfway point, we're going to draw in our eyes here. Now, the eyes aren't circular. Eye sockets don't look circular like that. They're actually more like trapezoid shapes that sit here on the structure of our face. So, thinking about those angles of that socket. And they slope outwards, they're not straight across. Look how they slope down. And this is because of, the way our bone structure works. And, really thinking about that trapezoid shape and making sure you don't draw it in as a circle. It's going to be a great way to start. So beneath that is our nasal cavity. Now, our nose it isn't like right beneath our eyes. It actually kind of starts in the middle of our eyes here. So we're going to, right somewhere in the middle piece, we're going to draw in our nasal cavity. Now we're not drawing our nose because we're drawing our, the skull here, starting with that nasal cavity itself. And it kind of looks like two teardrop shapes that are stuck together here in the middle. From there, let us draw our jaw, or the top of our mouth. So that actually comes down right beneath the circle here. So you can kind of imagine this little piece kind of stuck on the bottom here that's sticking out as our jaw, and you can put like little teeth on here. Not accurately drawing teeth at this point, but just to help you see where we're going. And you have to think that it's wrapping around. It's not straight across. It wraps. It follows the shape, of our head, because it is a sphere, essentially, that we're looking at, not just a circle. So from there, we got our cheekbones. So our cheekbones are going to come almost like coming right out of your eye here. It goes up and around and connects with that jaw. And, they start just beneath their eye, and you can actually feel it. Feel along your face. You can feel the cheekbones right underneath your skin there, especially right here. And there's, a piece of flesh that kind of like sits on top of your cheekbones that, when you smile, it covers up your eyes a little bit. Think about these little pieces of structure as we're building it. Knowing where your cheekbones are is going to make a really big difference when you're drawing your faces. So from there, this comes around for our eyebrow. So it follows the shape of the eye here, comes up and around. And you can feel this too. Feel the side of your eye there. You can actually feel this thickness right next to you, right next to your eye. And this is actually where your eyebrow is, and you can feel it kind of continuing up here to make this form that kind of juts out here. That is our eyebrow. That is the bone that is actually making up that piece there. And this top portion kind of protrudes. That's how we get the eyebrow shape. And the bottom portion here, it kind of recedes a little bit, so you got to think about that depth as we're drawing this. So from there, we go to the temple. And that's we get this little curve here. And there's like this little divot kind of in your head, this little soft spot. You can feel it if you feel your head there, that part where there's not quite bone. It's a little softer area. That is your temples that we have here. From there, let's draw out our skulls. And I'm going to shave a little bit off the sides here because our head is not perfectly circular. You really want to think about the angles when you're drawing everything. Really, not many things in life are perfectly circular. There's always these angles. And I'm going to talk about this a lot when I start talking about, drawing out figures even more. From here, we're going to have our jaw coming down, and it's right inside the cheekbone. It's not at the edge. It's just inside a little bit here. We'll have that jaw coming down at an angle. Think about where your chin is at the bottom here, and then it'll come up at an angle. Now, you have to really make sure you get that angle of your jawbone, because it's not, it's not straight across. Sometimes we tend to think that's how it's going to look. And this is going to depend a lot on, different ethnicities have different jaw angles. But it's going to come back at an angle like this here, and you can imagine, that chin, that little piece of the chin kind of protruding up on the front here. From there, we can draw in our teeth. Remember, thinking about it going around the face. Get those teeth in there, and then recedes backwards. We get that gap, and you can actually feel that. Like if you were to feel, your face, jab your finger into the area behind your cheek here, you can feel that there's kind of a gap, and that's that gap that's right behind your teeth, because it's not all exactly connected there. Okay, and that kind of is our front of our skull here, and these are our basic proportions that are gonna get us going. So from there, let us move on to the side view. So I want to start with the cranium. Now, one thing you'll notice, I didn't follow this circle because our cranium is actually pretty long. It's a lot longer than it is wide. Think about the alien movies. Think how long, the alien's head is. Ours isn't quite that long, but if you think about that, you'll help you realize that, our bodies aren't exactly, perfectly spherical. And it's something that people sometimes forget when they're drawing heads, and they'll forget there's all this extra space on the back. So sometimes people's heads will look flat because they don't have that extra space. They just do it, where the back of a circle will be. So make sure you really think about that length of our skull. Okay, so from there, we've got the forehead coming down, and think about where the eyebrow is. There's going to be that piece jutting out where our eyebrow is. and then it will come in. Now we want to think about where our eye is. So, we got this piece here. I'm going to, making sure my views line up. I'm going to have my eye receded back a little bit. It's not going to be, right up at the edge. It's actually a little bit back in the skull. We can think about that kind of receding backwards here at that trapezoidal shape. And then our nose, this actually comes back and then comes out here to make that divot at the top of our nose. See? It comes up here and then down again. I'm going to think about where's the bottom of this piece and have that come back out here. Now, I know it's tempting to want to draw out the nose here on front, but we're not doing that. We're drawing the skull. There is no nose here. It's just this big gap here. So we actually have this piece that juts out and then comes back around in here to make our, actually I'm going to have this come out a little bit farther. It comes out a little bit past our brow and then have it come down here. There we go. So that is our nose socket. And it kind of looks like a little divot from the side here. So from there, we got our, remember we have our eye that is set back. Let's do the bottom of our skull. So this is actually going to come here and kind of flatten out at the bottom and then come back in and up here. Get that little shape in there. And let's go down to our jaw. So our jaw, it's actually going to be the back of our jaw. Think about the whole head here. It's not quite at this line. It's actually more like the center of our entire skull. So the jaw is going to be a little bit farther back than we would have expected, than this box we had before. And thinking about where I want it to come down at an angle, lining this up here where that corner of the jaw is. Can come down here, get our chin, and then let's get our teeth. And you actually have to think about the teeth kind of jut forward a bit, and it comes back in to create that little bump on our jaw. And then we'll get in our teeth here, making sure we think about how they wrap around our skull. And that actually goes up in here. I'm going to actually do my cheekbone before I go ahead with my jaw, because the cheekbone actually comes out. It continues from this piece here. There's actually a piece that comes out here, continues around. And this is our cheekbone, so you can actually see it from the side viewed here. And then our eyebrow, we can see that bone come around here. And that goes back. And then this is, our temple area. We got that soft piece. But so you think about that jaw kind of sticking, that cheekbone kind of sticking out here. Okay, from there, now let's draw our teeth in. So we can draw this here. We get that little gap in the back of our teeth. We can draw in, some basic teeth in here. And there we have our skull from the side. Making sure we're keeping our proportions accurate from our front view, making sure we keep everything relatively the same. That's really important when doing your orthographic front view and side view, is making sure everything lines up. And then from there, we can go to our 3/4 view. So 3/4 view, I think, is helpful when really getting you to start thinking about this in a 3-dimensional form, because it's not flat. We're not just looking at a face flat on from the front or from the side. We're looking at that 3-dimensional view. So let's do that cranium. And we're going to have it receding backwards, kind of behind that sphere a bit. Thinking about those angles. And that forehead coming down here. So get that in. And then where do our eyes go? So we want to think about those eye sockets. Remember, we're starting at right beneath this halfway line that I had drawn in those eye sockets at that angle. Thinking about it wrapping around the head, it's not flat anymore. There is depth to this. Okay, we got some nice eye sockets here. From there, let's do our nose. You want to picture it kind of sticking out, remember, because it sticks out right here. And then you can draw in our nasal cavities. And we're kind of looking downward at the skull a bit, so you can actually see like the top of the head from here, thinking about that as we're going downwards. It's not exactly a straight on 3/4 view. Okay, from there we got our cheekbones. So they come out from where the eye is. There's our lovely cheekbones going around our eye socket to create our brow. Okay, and from there let's get our mouth in. So one important thing when we're drawing the mouth in here is you have to think about the mouth itself as like a cylinder, because it's not just flat across. It actually is a kind of cylinder form that's kind of stuck on the bottom of our jaw, of our head here. And so the teeth have to go around. And it's really important to make sure you really think about this three-dimensional form when you're drawing in our teeth. So let's think about that cylinder. Think about how this recedes backwards. Kind of looks like a happy skull now. Let's draw in some teeth. And then let's get in our, let's see, so the cheekbone actually comes back from here. The same thing with this, that goes backwards. And then our jaw is going to be something like this. I think that's too far back. Think about my chin here, that'll help. And I can draw that angle. There we go. And we're not going to see the back side of the jaw here because we got this, seeing this 3/4 view. You're only going to see part of it here. Think about that divot on the front of our chin there. Now we may not see that in the skull, but you know, there's going to be a little bit of a bump coming up. So you get a little bit of that three-dimensional. Actually, I'm going to come down a little bit more. There we go. And then we can get the rest of my teeth in. So we get the bottom jaw. And then this kind of comes around here for our little gap. And then there's another little piece right here. Okay, so there we go. We got our skull in three-dimensional form. Now, it's really important that you understand this because it's this structure that we're going to now use to then build the rest of our form on top of. You know, all of these pieces build everything outside of it. So, you know, we have the eye sockets where the eyes are going to be, the nasal cavity where the nose is going to be, you know, the teeth where the mouth is going to be. All these pieces here are going to inform us where everything else is. It's our internal structure. And one thing I highly recommend is building a 3D sculpture of your skull, and it's something that will really help you when really designing your own heads and making your own faces. If you sculpt your own little skull, making sure you keep all your proportions right. I use Sculpey, which is a type of clay that you can then bake, and then it hardens up, so then you can then build facial features on top of that. It can be really helpful when really trying to understand how the skull works, to build your own in 3D form instead of just thinking in this flat 2D way. But for now, you know, this is our basic skull that we have here, and let's move on from this. So next up, I want to talk to you about the face in planes. We're going to start building the features on top of our skull here, but before we get into all the details, I want to start thinking about the face in its basic planes. And we do this because I want to help you to think about this in the way we would think about all the other forms we've been dealing with. So, you know, doing circles, spheres, cones, rectangles. When you think about all the planes, it'll help you think about how light will hit those planes. So we're going to start dividing the face up that way. So I've got my skull kind of really transparent under here. I just want to barely see it. This is going to be our starting point. And before I get to any features, I want to show you another way of dividing up the face. And this will help you as you're drawing your own faces here and really start to help figure out how to lay out the features on the face, because not every time you're not necessarily going to want to draw the circle with the cross section and the square. That can get a little tedious, so that's why we use proportions to help us with that. So what we're going to do is start with this cross section here. You know, it is helpful to still start with the section with the circle and the divider, but if we start with this area here, this is, you know, where the top of our brow is. What we're going to be doing is dividing the face into thirds. So from this portion, I'm going to divide up from here to the top of the head. I'm going to go up about 3/4 of it. So 3/4 the distance from here to the top. And let's say it's about here. Okay, then from here, I'm going to measure that same distance down. So about this distance here is probably somewhere about here. And that distance down to the bottom should line up with the chin. So essentially what I just did was divided the face into thirds. 1, 2, 3. And if you're to look at these pieces, what we actually did was divide. This was our brow. We already knew that. This should be our hairline. So think of where your hair meets the skull. It's a great point to figure out on your head. This one is the bottom of our nose, and you can actually see it if you can kind of see the skull barely underneath it. That's where the bottom of our nose is. And then here is our chin. So we divided that up into thirds, and that's kind of like our baseline here. And I'm going to go ahead and do that for the other faces. So I'm going to make a line here. So, and I'm going to measure it out. I'm just going to make a new layer so I can measure this out here so I'm accurate. It's probably a little bit high. So I'll make a line here. It's my brow, my bottom of my nose, and my chin. Put that a little bit lower. This one's a little bit trickier because it's the 3/4 view, so it's not going to line up perfectly. Get rid of that. I'm going to take this. I'm going to put a line essentially through the center of the face. Maybe a little bit. There we go. So I'm going to imagine dividing that up. Here's our brow. Here's about where the hairline is. Underneath the nose and our chin. So that's basically dividing it up into our thirds. So that's our starting base here. From that, I'm going to make a new layer. And I'm going to just put in the basic outline of our face here. So just going to simply block this in, you know, cutting down the circle a little bit, connecting that to the jawline. Just real simple here. You know, thinking of angles, making sure not to make this too smooth in any way. And I'm just going to bow out the front of the face a little bit, because our front of the face isn't actually flat. There is a little bit of depth to it. And then let's do this. And get the back of our head and our chin. So this is, you know, our basic outline for when looking at a face. So I can kind of get rid of my skull. We don't necessarily need that. Actually, before I do that, I'm just going to put in the eyes quickly. Since I already nicely laid out my eyes, we're going to put in our eye sockets. We're not dealing with eyeballs yet. We're still kind of dealing with sockets here. When we're looking at the face in planes, you know, we're not really thinking about eyes yet. That's kind of a detail that we're not really going to worry about. But I do want to lay out where the eye sockets will be, because that'll help us. Okay, so getting rid of the skull. So this is our basic, you know, breakdown of our outline of our head here. So from there, we want to start thinking about the different planes. The first plane that I like to think about is the forehead. You know, if you think about it, your forehead's a relatively flat surface, and this we now know is relatively our hairline. So you can make essentially a box on the top of our head that's going to represent that forehead. And from this side view, you know, it's going to look something like this. You know, imagining that forehead plane there. And from our 3/4 view, it'll look something like that. So you can imagine that forehead just sitting there right on top. And we're going to essentially break down our face into all these different planes here as we move on. Before I go to the next one, I want to throw in our ear here because that's going to be a big feature that will help us. And when figuring out where to put the ear in the face, it starts right behind your jawline, which is actually, you know, about halfway between your skull here. So you can imagine the ear kind of sitting behind it. And where does it start and end? There's another great way to remember that. It actually starts about, lines up with the top of your eye and the bottom of your nose. So whenever you're drawing your ear, you basically line it up with your eye and the bottom of your nose. And that's a super helpful thing to remember. And you can look in a mirror if you question this. It'll really help you remember those proportions. You know, some people have trouble remembering where to put the ear, and once you realize it lines up perfectly with your eyes and your nose, it's just going to make one of those things so much easier and help you remember where to put the ear there. Okay, so we got our ears kind of laid in here. And then from there, I just want to kind of divide up the rest of the head into sections. And there's no specific exact way to do this, but essentially what I'm trying to do is think about the skull in different planes here. So like if there's different pieces that you were to cut out like a puzzle to put our head together, this is essentially what I would be envisioning here. Let's put kind of a piece on the back of the head. Yeah, we'll just put one kind of there. You know, looking at it from the top, or looking at it from the 3/4 view, we're going to imagine a piece, you know, there, another one here, and that comes up. This will divide up, and we can divide there. So just trying to think about this into its basic shapes and forms. And by dividing it up like this, it'll just help you visualize how light will capture it. So from here, you know, thinking about the front of the face, I'm basically just going to make a plane that kind of goes down here from the forehead. There's like that front area of your face, and all this, you know, kind of recedes backwards. And I can do the same thing here and there. So you can imagine that plane. We don't really need, let's see if we'll get rid of the grid now. Yeah, we don't really need that anymore. We can kind of simplify this. Do we need the circle? No, let's keep this simple. Let's move on without those. Okay, so we have this front plane here that's on our face, and this doesn't quite accurately, you know, divide up. We don't really have just like a front area and a back area, but one thing that I like to do is try to define those cheeks. So what I do is I actually make a line that goes from the top of the ear, kind of swoops around down towards the chin, and this is going to essentially imply where our cheekbones would be. So if you were to see like here and that, and just see, putting that piece in already, it all of a sudden gives me this sense of form, how our cheeks actually do cut in like that, and we get this area underneath where we are getting that depth here. And that really is kind of my basic, you know, planes for the face. Now let's get in a few more details. So we want to get the eyes and the nose in there a little bit more. And the part with the eyes is, you know, they don't sit flat on top of our face. You know, looking at our planes right now, we need to account for the fact of what the section of our face looks like with our eyes. So the way I like to think about that is, you know, essentially a box that kind of sits on top of our face. So, or cut into our face. Sorry, I'm thinking here and trying to talk at the same time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a rectangle essentially around our eyes. You're not going to be able to tell what I'm doing here in the front view, and I'm going to put like a little division through there. Where you will see this is my side view, because what I'm doing is cutting the face like that. So this is actually a chunk I'm cutting right out here. So that means we don't need this anymore. So it's a little bit of cut that we got in here that will help define that piece for our eyes. And the reason I do that is because, you know, our eyes are set backwards, and having that piece set backwards will help you when figuring out how light catches this. And then it comes out from there. Oh, let's go. There we go. So there's our eyes. All of a sudden we get that a little bit more depth now. That will help you out. And then let's put in our nose. And I'm going to switch colors again. So our nose is kind of like a tapered rectangle. It's a little bit triangular. It's going to start here, kind of between the eyes, and come out. And it's not flat, it's actually narrower on the top. Oops. You can't really see it from this angle, but what you have to think about when drawing your nose, if you were to look underneath, under your nose, what the nose actually looks like in, you know, a simplified form is something like this. So there's our nostrils. So it starts out wider on the bottom, comes in and gets narrower on the top, and then comes back out again, and we put our nostrils underneath. So that's kind of the basic form you want to think about for your nose. And now everyone has different shaped noses. Some have wider ones, some have flatter ones, some have narrow noses. It all depends on gender, ethnicity, all that stuff. But this is our kind of like basic nose that we're putting in here. And then we can put that nose right on top of here. And then we'll put that nose here. And this way you'll actually see that tapered piece a little bit more. Actually, we're not going to see underneath the nose. It's going to look more like that. Okay, so now we just need one more piece here, and that's what will connect the nose to the forehead, because there's not a gap here. There actually is a piece that connects this, and it kind of looks like a, you know, a upside down triangle. And this is actually called the keystone. So this connects the nose to the forehead. And it's another one of those like tapered triangle forms. And essentially, you know, sits here connecting those two pieces together. And you don't want to forget that, otherwise you're basically going to have a big divot on your face. And that will just give it that little bit of depth. Okay, so you can see how this is coming together a little bit now. Then lastly is just figure out where the mouth is. And that's a simple one from here. Basically, your mouth is about halfway between the bottom of the nose and the chin. So, mouth. Yay! It's got a mouth. And I'm not going to worry about details yet. I'm just kind of placing it in here. Okay, so this is our face in planes. It's a nice, easy way to simplify the form a little bit. Think about it in its basic shapes. And then once you do that, you can start, let's make a new layer. You can think about how light will actually hit this. So if I was to imagine light was coming down, the sun was coming down this angle, you can picture that the sun is actually hitting the forehead, so this is going to be our lightest area, and then this whole area on the side will be in shadow. Underneath the eyes will be in shadow. This might be in shadow a little bit too, but the most shadow will be here, thinking about that light coming down. You know, the side of the nose will have a little bit of shadow to it. It'll probably be casting a shadow underneath it. And you can think about that chin, since this is like cutting in, there's probably going to be like an extra shadow coming here on that side where it hits the light area, because you'd be having a reflective light coming up, bouncing up here, and lightening up this just a little bit. But you know, you'd probably have some darker areas about here. You know, thinking about these planes, and maybe since this one's fading back a little bit, that might be a little bit in shadow too. But you want to break things down into these basic shapes, and it'll help you visualize how light will hit certain things at different areas. And it just makes it that much easier. So that's our face in planes. Next up, we're going to start looking at it in detail. Okay, so let's get into the details of the face, all that finite minutia that makes us who we are. Now, I'm going to forewarn you again that I'm going to be making a lot of generalizations here, and I just want to preface this that every face is different, and there's a lot of things that will vary from gender and ethnicity, weight, everything like that. So I'm definitely making some big generalizations here, but you have to realize that if you start with these basic forms, then you can know how to, you know, make them bigger or smaller, more flat, more wide, depending on the different gender or ethnicity or anything else that you're dealing with. So this is just our basic starting points as we're kind of moving forward here. So that's my one warning that I'm saying as we're going on here. Okay, so we got our face here. Remember, we measured it out into those thirds like we had before. Trying to remember my basic measurements here. Keeping that in mind as we're going on. So let's start getting into the details. First off, let's do the eyes. Finally want to get into the eyes. Now, I have the skull kind of faded here in the background just as a kind of guideline as we're building upwards. And the first thing we want to do is actually put the eyeballs in the head, because we've been dealing with essentially the socket so far, and we want to get into the actual shape of the eye. And this is so important that whenever you're drawing a face, you have to remember that the eye itself is not what we see. You know, it's like an iceberg. There's that much more of it that's below the surface here. So it is a sphere that sits within our head. And that's really important because it's going to affect how eyelids look. Because, you know, the eyelids aren't just a flat form that's sitting on top of our face. The eyelids are something that wrap around the spherical form. So you have to think about that shape. So, you know, basically our eye here is we have the sphere, and then on that we have an iris and a pupil. So I'm going to draw a really creepy skull right now before we get into the eyelids. So, you know, it kind of sits like that on top of our face. Let's get some shading in here. Okay, so then how do we actually draw eyes? Now, it's a tendency when people go to draw an eye, they do that basic almond shape. So they're like top, bottom. Well, let's even do that. Let's make it a little bit more even. Top, bottom, that's an eye. Here's the eyeball. There we go. And that's like the typical form. I mean, a lot of kids, you know, this is what we draw as eyes. But what happens with this is it looks very flat. And, you know, eyes aren't really like this perfect almond shape. There's a lot more depth to them and more curve to them. So you have to really think about that. You have to think about the pupil itself. So let's draw a sphere. I'm going to draw two spheres here. So I'm going to have a side view and a front view, essentially. And on the side view, so you got to imagine that 3D sphere with a wireframe. Like we've been talking about all along here. What does that look like here with that frame on top of it? Think of that 3D form. So on here, you know, we have our iris and pupil. Put that on here too. Our iris and pupil. And around that, the skin of the eyelid will wrap. And you have to think about how it actually will wrap around this 3D form. So it's going to come up and over and come back in and down and around and back in, thinking about that 3D shape. You know, what does it look like in depth? And it'll meet here at the corners, and there's, you know, that usually that little piece on the inside of your eye for your tear ducts. So really thinking about that 3D form will help you draw your eye. So if we were to look at this from the front, you know, you got to think about that shape of what it looks like when it comes up. Actually, I'm going to have it come in and around here. So it's going to be narrower on the inside. And what will usually happen if, you know, you're looking at someone, you know, someone's looking at you with like kind of a straight face without any expression, usually their eyelid is covering the top part of their eye. And then underneath it, they'll come around and back. And it usually isn't covering the bottom part. And a lot of things will depend on where they're looking and where you are and what expressions they're making. But typically, you know, you may see the bottom part of the eye too, or bottom part of the iris. This will actually, you'll see a little bit of white here. And you can see how this kind of wraps up and around. And there's lots of different shapes of eyes. Some are a little bit more almond shape, but there usually is like different curves. Usually, you know, it's kind of narrower on the inside and comes out and around towards the outside. There is that shape to it, and you have to think about our tear ducts here, which you can usually see, which adds that little bit of, you know, depth to it around here. And then the eyelids, you know, they wrap around this ball here because you have to be able to close your eyes and open them. So there has to be enough skin that it can cover all the way down. So usually when you open your eye, you get that little flap of skin that kind of sits up and beneath it, just so you have enough of that extra skin so you can open and close it. And you have to think about it. And depending on, the depth of your face, your cheekbones and your eyebrows, you usually see like just maybe a little hint of the shape of, the eye socket underneath it. So those are the details you really got to think about when drawing your eye. So if we were to go ahead and draw this on here, let's draw, the kind of corner here. Let's have it come up and around. I'm gonna start erasing this here. And it's really a fun exercise, honestly, I think, to draw eyes. Because I think you can learn so much and you can get so much expression from having, well-drawn eyes. So if you ever have a chance to, photograph someone's eyes or actually sit and look at someone in the eye, you will learn so much about face structure and how to convey emotion. Because, I mean, this is where our emotions come from. I don't know if you've ever heard, when you're getting your picture taken sometimes with a photographer, people say cheese and you sit there and smile and your smile looks so fake. And that's because you're smiling with your mouth and not your eyes. And really the key is to smile, with your eyes itself. Because there is that extra little expression your eyes will have based on how much you squint your eyes, how much pupil we'll see will really determine how happy you look. So it's those little features that will make a difference. And then, not really dealing with eyelashes yet, but, just want to throw them on there. The eyelashes themselves, they don't actually come from the corner of the eye. They sit on the eyelid itself, so they're kind of like lined up here. And you gotta make sure they're not actually going right into the eye. They sit on that edge there, and depending on the person, they may come out or around a little bit. But, making sure you think about that volume, and those will give expressions too. Women usually will have like thicker, bushier eyebrows, so, thinking about your character, if you want to make, a really beautiful woman, give her big, luscious eyebrows. Those things always help. Okay, so it's our eyes here. The face is typically 5 eyes wide, so if we were to put eyeballs on here, there would typically be about 5 spaces, so there's usually about 1 eyeball space between your 2 eyes. As I said, some people have eyes that are farther apart, but that's a really great guideline to help you. And usually this goes out a little bit farther than you think. Sometimes people like kind of just to end it like right here where they meet, but usually, there's a little bit space that comes out and around on either side. It'll help give you that depth of your face if you don't flatten it out too much. Okay, so moving on, let's go to the ear. So I mentioned before, the ear will line up with our brow, so the top of the eye or the brow will be the top of the ear, and it'll come down and around to the bottom of the nose. And some people will have ears that will stick out. Some people have really narrow ears that are close to their face. All depends on the person. But ears are another one of those things that are really complicated, and people don't really tend to look at ears very often. So it's something that can tend to be forgotten a little bit. I'm going to erase this here. So a lot of times people will draw ears without actually really understanding the structure of the ear itself. So you'll get a lot of like ears with like swirlies in it, and it's really not what an ear looks like. So it's another one of those things that's really great to actually pay attention to what an ear actually looks like. So a typical ear is a C. I think we know that. We have our earlobe on the bottom, and some people will have ears that kind of narrow in, that come like this. The earlobe will depend, it's one of those genetic traits where your earlobe may actually come out where you have this earlobe sitting beneath it, and then it comes up and connects here. But there's some people where their earlobe actually connects right into their face there, and they don't really have a piece that's kind of on the bottom. So that will depend from person to person. But generally speaking, what we have is a flap that comes around the top. So this is actually like a flap that will come up and over, and it will connect in your ear here. So it will start inside, come out and around, and then come back and around, and then it will start to vanish. It'll start to taper off and just meld into your ear here. So this will get, less pronounced as we go around. And you can feel free to feel your ear, feel what the shape looks like as I'm talking about it. Or look in a mirror, look at what your ear actually looks like. So from there, you got this piece, you kind of gotta imagine this going up and around here, but it actually comes up here, and then usually you got that, here's the hole in your ear essentially with a little flap that kind of is protecting it. That's why we got that little piece there. This connects with essentially another C inside our ear, so we'll start about here, come around, and connect with this little hole. So this is our hole, put a little shadow in. Actually, I probably made that a little too big. So we got that section here, and so this part of the flap actually comes right into this divot, because this is definitely like the deepest part of your ear inside. And this is coming right in here. All right, and then there's kind of like this Y-shaped piece that sits on here, and it'll come around like this. Oops, no. It's connected to this. This is your Y-shaped piece that will come around, and so this is kind of a bump that's on the inside of your ear. Come on, my eraser's too big. So it'll look like that, and so this is be another part where it's kind of an indentation, where it comes around, and this will stick out just a little bit, you know, depending on what your ear looks like. So it's kind of the basic structure of the ear, and really, you know, if you're ever drawing a portrait of someone and you're doing the side of their face where you actually see their ear, really make sure you take the time to pay attention to what ears actually look like so you can actually do it justice and not make it look like some sort of alien ear, because it happens all the time that people draw these like alien looking ears and they don't look correct. So from a side view, you know, we may not see that much, but you know, usually you'll see kind of the flap coming out, and then you may see that little piece here, and maybe a little bit of kind of like the indentation, something like that. You won't see a whole lot from the side, but you know, thinking about that shape will help you when you're drawing it from here. So let me go ahead and draw my other ear so I can have a symmetrical face. Have this coming out, have that little piece, and then have that kind of round. Okay, so there's our ears. Moving on, let's do our eyebrows. So the eyebrows itself, we talked about this bone that's up here is your brow. So think about that bone coming in and coming around, connecting to that keystone. This is our keystone right here. And this is the bone that comes up and over. And then your actual eyebrow itself will sit on top of that bone. And we got lots of different eyebrow shapes. There's narrow ones, there's thicker ones. Also depends on if you groom your eyebrows or you just let them grow naturally. You may have unibrows, all sorts of those things. But it is sitting right on top of that bone there. So that's an important feature to think about here. And you know, usually you may see, depending on the face, you may still see where like the eye kind of meets the socket in there, depending on how open or closed someone's eye is. Okay, so then that's it for the eyeball, or for the eyebrow. Let's move on to the nose. Another one of those more complicated things to draw. You know, we started out before with doing that, you know, kind of trapezoid, or not trapezoid, triangular shape here, but there's more details to it than that. If you want to help line things up, a great thing to help you figure out, you know, how wide is my nose? Typically speaking, the nose will line up with the corners of the eye. So if you were to draw a line down from the very corners of your eyes there, this will be where the outside of the nose is. Nice little trick to help you out. When we're thinking about what the nose actually looks like, so let's do our kind of nose in perspective here. Remember this shape I was talking about where it's wider on the bottom, narrower on the top. So I'm kind of trying to draw this essentially like with a little depth in it. So we're looking up at it. What will help you in drawing a nose is you want to think about it in essentially 3 pieces. It's made up of 3 little balls. So you have one big ball in the middle and 2 smaller balls on the side. And if you think about that shape that way, it'll really help you with your structure. all of a sudden your nose kind of has shape. You know, it's not just that rectangle, it is these three pieces, three little balls that sit on the end there. From here, the center will actually come down and it'll, you know, makes that little divot on your face. You can feel it. You can actually put, you know, put your nose on your fingers on your face and feel where that nose actually comes down, creates that little divot so that the center part is connected to your face. And then the balls are where the nostrils are, and the nostrils will actually come out from this and around. So out and around onto these, you know, side circles here. And just by doing that, we just have that general shape of a nose. You know, some people have wider noses, some have flatter noses, some have narrow noses. It all makes a difference. From here, it's just a matter of, you know, what's the bone look like that, or the cartilage, I guess, that looks like that connects it. Is it narrow, or does it like bulge out a little bit? You know, really paying attention to different faces will help you. But just remembering that there is a little bit of shadow that comes down here, you know, from that keystone, will give you that depth when you're drawing your face here. So I can kind of erase this. Just thinking about that shape here. That will give you your basic nose. Oops. Okay, so we got a nose. Let's move on down to the mouth. So as we said before, the mouth will sit basically halfway between the bottom of the nose and the chin. So let's put the mouth about here. So another question is, how wide is our mouth? Some people have wide mouths, some have narrow, but generally speaking, if you were to measure a line down from the center of the pupil down, that's typically where the corner of your mouth is. And that's a great piece that'll help you out, help you figure out, you know, that shape of your mouth, how wide it is on a person. And then from there, you can actually, if you were to extend this out even more, usually your mouth lines up with where your chin or your jawline actually is. So you can see maybe I was a little bit low on my jawline before, so I'm just going to bring it up a bit. There's my jawline. So now I can go in and start drawing my mouth. How do we draw a mouth? It's the next key feature on our face, because as kids, you probably have all drawn a mouth at some point that looks like this. And one thing you have to think about is that our face is rounded. So it's not sitting flat on our face. Even though doing this front view here, it's going to kind of look flat, you have to think about the depth and how things curve around the face. And actually, one thing that may help you is realizing we have this area here that comes up from our keystone around to our chin. This is actually called the denture sphere. And think about like a monkey. You know how monkeys have that piece on the front of our face? We technically have that kind of piece too, that bulge that sits on the front of our face. And so our lips wrap around that bulge. And you have to think about that when you're thinking about the depth of your, you know, the face itself and what the mouth looks like, and trying to think about how it rotates around. And then when we go to actually draw the mouth itself, you know, think about it in pieces. Like we did our nose, think about the pieces that make up our mouth. So essentially our top lip is made up of 3 pieces. So we have got 1 in the center, 2 on the sides. I'm going to just draw a line here for now. And then the bottom lip is made of 2 pieces. So 1 here and 1 here. So it's kind of like our basic structure that will get us going here. It's kind of like our little pieces of fat that we're going to build our face on top of. So in the center, lips usually tend to divot in like that, and then come out, up, and around. So let's have this come up and around. When doing the inside, you know, it's not just straight. They're actually, that divot will usually continue, matching that top here, and then going over. And I usually like to give it a little bit of a curve. You know, I'm not drawing a straight line across, I'm curving it as I'm going through here. And then the bottom lips, they don't actually usually come out from the corner here. That lip is usually a little bit inside. And thinking about that will really help you when making the shape of your lips. So the top even comes around like this a little bit. So you want to usually get that little bit of corner on your lips there, the corner of your mouth, and the bottom lips will come out like this. And giving that little bit of depth, making sure you're not using straight lines, using curved lines, will help give that form and make it look like, you know, lips that are wrapping around a face. So let's go ahead and draw that in here. So I'm gonna draw my shapes. And you do want to think about, you know, think about your gender, ethnicity, everything like that. But typically, you know, women, you know, if you want to draw like a beautiful woman, women tend to have like thicker, more luscious lips, where men tend to have like thinner lips. So, you know, think about that, you know, depending what character you're drawing, because that will help you. Making this curve. This is another thing I'd recommend looking at a mirror, drawing. So really the only way to get better is to actually sit and study things. I mean, I could tell you this a million times, but you're not actually going to learn this for yourself until you sit in a mirror or take a photograph of someone and draw from that photograph and see what these things really look like on people. Honestly, doing things for yourself is the best way to learn anything. So there we go, we got lips, and you want to think about, you know, as you're doing this, think about the lips actually curving out, like that wireframe. If there's a wireframe on the lips, what would they look like? And that will help you. And typically, you know, the top lip usually is a little bit more in shadow than the bottom lip, because if we have light coming down. Same thing with like underneath the eyes, usually underneath the eyes here will be more in shadow. Thinking about these little things will help you. Side of the nose, underneath the nostrils, just getting a little bit of shape in here. Okay, so moving on to our chin. You know, remember there's like a little ball that sits on the front of your chin. So usually what ends up happening is a lot of people tend to have like a little divot here that just, you know, shows from there where that chin is protruding out just a bit. And what will usually happen is there'll usually be a little bit of shadow underneath here that will catch, you know, catch that shadow so you can see that chin protruding forward. From there, you know, laugh lines. A lot of people have laugh lines, especially depending on age. You know, the area that comes out from your denture sphere. So imagine it coming out around your nose, around the denture sphere, around your mouth. These are your laugh lines, and this will usually get more pronounced the older you get. So you really want to think about that. And if you're smiling, you know, usually, you know, when your cheeks go up, this line will get pushed up, and then the fat on the top of your cheek will get pushed up, which will make your eyes more squinty. You know, thinking about how all these things are connected together will make such a difference. Okay, so I think I got all the features here. And these are just guidelines, as I said, that will help you when making your forms, you know, when making your own people. If you keep these things in mind, even when you're using references, it'll just help you make your people look more accurate and feel, you know, feel more human, because that's what we're all striving to do here. And these are still things you can use, you know, if you're drawing animals that are kind of humanistic, you know, you can use these type of guidelines to help you to create an animal that has those more humanistic features to them. You know, if it's an animal that talks in like cartoons, think about these proportions, because it'll help you to make something that's kind of a mixture between animal and human. Okay, so that's it for the details. Next up, let's get into hair. Okay, so let's now talk about hair. And honestly, for me, hair is the fun part. I wasn't a very girly girl growing up, but I admittedly had a few dolls and I played with their hair. So there's a part of me that really enjoys putting hair on my characters. And it's one of those things where you can really have fun with, because there's so many different varieties of hair. Not just color, but also thinking of shape. There's so much more than, you know, straight and curly hair. There's also wavy hair. Thinking about the thickness of your hair will make a huge difference. And that gives you a lot of fun opportunities to really play with different hairstyles, to see how you can give your character that much more character, essentially. So it really helps if you understand how hair works. You know, thinking about, you know, how heavy is my hair? Thick hair is usually heavier. Thin hair doesn't have a lot of volume to it. Things like that will help you. The first thing you want to start with is the hairline, because that's where your hair is going to start, and that's super important. And there's lots of different hairlines here. You know, there could be a guy who has like a receding hairline that goes really far back. Usually it comes out and around kind of towards the eyebrow and then back down here. So, you know, it could be something like that. Or it could be less receding. It could come forward a bit where it actually comes down and around. You probably still get that little piece where it comes towards the eye. And there usually is pieces that are you know, around your, in front of your ear there. Thinking about the sideburns. Everyone has sideburns to some degree. So, you know, there's lots of things you can play with, and once again, it's always helpful to look at different people and look at different hairstyles, and see how they really move around the head. But it definitely helps you to kind of get that basic form in here and start with this before you do anything else, because this is where your hair starts. It's your hairline. So from here, you have to remember that hair doesn't just, you know, stick out of the head. It actually comes out from pieces of the head and around, and there is volume, there is gravity that brings it downwards. So usually I kind of start with my part. You know, where is the part? Everyone has some sort of part. Let's put it in the center here from now, and the hair will start here. You know, will start by coming out. And some people, depend on the hairstyle, maybe they have their hair brushed forward, so the hair actually, maybe you won't see a part like this. Maybe the hair will be coming forward and down over their face. Sometimes the hair goes up, depending on how you have it styled. It may come up and out like this, depending on, you know, how much volume they have. Think about that. What do they have? Bangs? You know, how does the hair actually move around this head? So there's lots of fun things you can really play with. I'm going to start with kind of a basic one, having the hair kind of come up like here. And you have to remember, this is the top of your skull. The hair is not going to look like this. It's not going to be, you know, right on top of your head. There is going to be that little bit of gap as it comes up from your head, because it will actually come upwards out from your head here. And then gravity will start to pull it down. Now, I have very thin hair. It's one of the things I wish I had thicker hair, but that means my hair doesn't come up very high. It usually comes up a little bit and then basically just comes back down. And it's pretty weighted, so that means my hair just comes like down like this. And this is why I don't have long hair, because it has no volume to it. It's so thin that it doesn't poof out at all. If I was to wear my hair long, it essentially would come out like this and then just go straight down to something like this. And my hair just looks flat, which is the reason why I have my hair short. When my hair is short, there's less weight pulling it down, so that I can actually have a haircut that gets a little bit more volume to it. Although not this much volume, I'm not that lucky, but it just gives me a little bit more bounce. And, you know, having your character with a short hairstyle can actually give you a lot of things to play with. If you ever looked at Miyazaki movies, most of his characters have short hair, because he can do this. When he wants to give his character emotion and wants to give them movement, he makes their hair kind of like poof out and get all this volume, and it gives them so much more emotion. So, you know, you have some potential for doing short hair, and your short hair person doesn't have to have thin hair like me. You know, they could have thick hair, so maybe their hair really like comes up higher. Thinking about how it comes up and around here, think about how that will affect it. Okay, so, you know, things to think about. You know, does your character have curly hair? Because all of a sudden, you know, they have curly hair. You have so much that you can do. You can have so much volume. You know, is it wavy? Does it come out and around? Does it come out in big waves like this? What you have to remember is that hair, whether or not it's curly or straight, usually chunks up a little bit. It'll come out in sections. So like maybe there's this one section that's kind of in front here, and then you'll have another section that kind of waves around here. And this is for straight or curly hair. You really don't want to just make hair that's, you know, this is hair. You know, it is in chunks, in pieces. It breaks down into different forms. It tends to want to group together. So you want to think about these groups and how you can use these groups to actually create volume. You know, whether or not it's wavy or straight. especially if you look at wavy people or people with like really curly hair, you can start to see how those curls kind of, you see curls because the hair is chunking up. That's what's happening there. So using that will really make a difference. I mentioned talking about your bangs before, but let's say they have hair coming down front of their face. Think about the face itself, because you remember the face, is not flat. The face has depth to it. So does the hair follow the face? Maybe it comes to the eyebrow and then comes back in and then out over the cheek again. Especially if it's wet, it'll really cling to the side of the face here. Think about how the form of the face, that 3D of it, will really affect how the hair itself looks. And you don't want to just make one big chunk. As I said, you can get away with if you're doing like a really simplified cartoon of just making big chunks. But if you're doing something a little bit more realistic, besides, having it in these, these different pieces, like I said, but think about the stray hairs. No one's hair is perfect, especially if you look at them in real life. Everyone has like stray hairs kind of sticking out here. And it can depend on your character, like how, are they battling? Are they in some sort of battle or running from zombies? Their hair's going to be a little bit messy, and you can use more pieces sticking out to actually create more energy to them. Or is it someone like in a suit and they're really cleaned up, but they'll still have some pieces, some fly pieces here and there, especially in that back there where the back of your head is. You'll have chunks kind of, little pieces, flyaways every now and then, and that'll just make your hair that much more realistic when you think about those flyaways in certain pieces. Honestly, I'm having a lot of fun making hair right now. Okay, what else do I want to talk about here? So I've been playing with girl hair so far, but guys you have some things you can play with hair as well. So really thinking about that hairline here. Thinking about all the different short hairstyles you can have for men. So we can have a part from this side this time. So if the part's from this side, let's have this kind of come up over here. So then this hairstyle we'll have it come up and down this time. And think about the hair, as I said, in chunks, but especially when you're getting to short hairstyles, the hair will actually be layered. And if you have any type of short hairstyle, it's not going to just be, if this was the part, it's not going to just come out and be one length here. If it's short, there actually will be almost like planes of hair that are layered on top of each other. And if you think about it that way, it'll give you more depth. So there'll be pieces here, then there'll be like another layer here that will come out. And it depends on, how men's hairstyles are cut. But you want to think about those layers on top of each other. So there'll actually be pieces here, and then there's going to be new pieces here, and things like that. And still thinking about it in kind of chunks, because it'll still kind of break up into those little planes. Thinking about how things are layered on top of each other will make a difference. And we can see I've already made this too short. Let's think about where that part is coming back. We'll give him a little bit more, I'm just giving her a guy cut right now. I kind of figure my character looks a little bit more female here based on like the lips and the nose and the eyes I gave her. So let's have this come out here. So this layer kind of ends there. And maybe there's kind of another layer here. So I'm really thinking about how the hair itself fits around the head is the big thing. And playing with different hairstyles can really make a difference to what your character looks like. So seriously, have fun with it. You can do a lot of different things. Okay, so from there, what about facial hair? Does your character have a mustache? Do they have a beard? Whenever you're dealing with facial hair, remember that it's got 3D volume, unless it's just stubble that sits on your face. If your character has a mustache or a beard, it actually will sit on top of the face like a 3D form. So you want to think about the depth of your form here, how it actually comes out and around. And it helps that you actually have the piece of hair, you can see that, but thinking about that, maybe there's like a goatee, and it's got depth to it too. It's not just a flat piece, it is a three-dimensional form. Maybe there is a beard that comes around here too. Think about how it comes out from the face. And think about the hair in chunks, just like before. If it's a short beard like this, not as much, but as the beard gets bigger, if you want like a big Santa beard, there'll be waves of certain areas that kind of clump together. give her a beard on the other side. You know, how long is the hair for the beard? You know, how long have they been growing it out? And once again, it'll still layer on top of each other. How well groomed is the beard? I've never had a beard myself, but I've heard beard grooming is a big thing that guys tend to care about. So, you know, think about how, you know, you can use the beard itself as an expression of your character. And there's times and places to use beards and mustaches. It all depends on, you know, what's the character you're making here. Okay, so I mean, that's kind of the breakdown of it. It really helps to do your research, look at photographs, look at different hairstyles, and you're more than welcome to look around, find a hairstyle you like, and put it on your character. And it's a great way to test out, you know, different ways to make the same exact character look completely different, is to give them a very different hairstyle. And it just really changes how they look. As you can see from my few little examples here I did, you know, just having different hairstyles, I just really changed this character. And you can have fun with it, but making sure you build it on top of your skull so it actually is hair, pieces of hair coming out of your skull, and not just like laying flat on top of it. Okay, that is it for our head section.